Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where we're beginning our fourth year tonight. It's hard to believe how 3 years have gone by so fast. And this is our first show of the season, and we're glad to have you on board. And if you're watching us, you're not watching one of the baseball games, and we appreciate that too. We are doing a program tonight on us. If you live in rural Minnesota, this is a program about your interests, values, some of the things that have been discovered in a pretty thorough survey that was done in rural Minnesota. And when I say rural Minnesota, we're talking just about everywhere outside of the 7-county metro area, and also cities of 35,000 or more are not included in this. But it's called rural. It's called not rural. It's called Rural Pulse 2010. The study was actually done last year, but the information is very, very current. And this study was done by my guest this evening, Carol Russell, who is with Russell Herder in Brainerd. And Carol, maybe before we get into the study, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your particular business that you are with.
I am with Russell Herder, like you said. We are a strategic research and creative communications firm. So we're located Brainerd, Minneapolis, and we're fortunate enough to be involved in this study when it took place last year.
Was it basically done in a year, the study itself?
It was done over the course of about 2 months.
2 months.
And so it was late in 2010. So like you said, the information still is very accurate.
Well, what is Rural Plus, and why did Blandon think it was important to do this?
Well, as you probably are aware, the foundation is dedicated to strengthening rural communities throughout the state of Minnesota, and as part of that, they feel it is critical to monitor what the issues are, what are the perceptions of people that live in this part of the state, meaning non-metro, what are the concerns, what are the priorities, so that they can speak to those through their programming. And
what are some of your key findings? What are the things that, I know when I first saw this stuff, I was really kind of blown away by some of the information. But what are some of the key findings that you think have been found to be really important in the study?
Well, it's fascinating because we ended up talking to over 1,000 people, and there were some things that we maybe would have expected and some things that were surprises. One of the things that we learned was that most rural residents are fairly satisfied with the services that are available to them, whether we're talking health care, education, that sort of thing. They feel that the quality of life could potentially improve, however. It was very interesting that 40% said they felt quality of life had declined over the last 5 years.
Do you think that's because of the recession?
I think it is definitely, economically related, and we've got a couple things in a minute that I'll be talking about that points to that. But interestingly, and I think this is something maybe it's a surprise, maybe not, that there's profound reason to be optimistic. 7 in 10 people are convinced it's going to improve. So this isn't necessarily a negative situation. They feel that quality of life has declined somewhat, but they feel it's going to improve soon. So that's a good
optimism
thing.
there.
Yes, definitely. I also think, another issue that we were really wanting to study was community engagement. Just wanting to know, do people feel that they can make a difference in their community? Do they feel that people are working together? 9 in 10 feel that they are able to make their community a better place to live. That surprised me a little bit, but people really do feel that they can make a difference. Where there was concern, it had to do with the ability of communities to work together. There was a significant feeling, and I believe it was 23%, that said that they don't feel their community works together well. And that's, so it's that collaboration piece. So they feel individually very confident, but just not necessarily as far as a team working together. That was particularly strong among the non-Caucasian residents.
It really is a small percentage, isn't it, that are disagreeing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, very, very positive. That is interesting.
Yes.
I found that interesting before, too. Very mm-hmm. positive that, if you were to talk to people in 2006, 2007, and imagine that we're going to tell them that, our whole
right.
economic model is at risk.
Right.
No one would have believed
No.
that. And now that it is, people haven't caved in and collapsed. I don't know what the unemployment level is in Minnesota. I think it's 7% in that range. Nationally, it's 9.1%. But even 7% it's much higher than most of our communities are used to. I know last year in the Brainerd area, I think we were looking at 20% unemployment in the winter. That's really staggering, I think.
Well, in the central Minnesota area in particular, in the study showed up as a particular region where there was concern about jobs. You know, that was statewide, but especially in central Minnesota, whether they had to do with the construction, recreational economy, something like that. You know, another thing that we really saw was this economic concern, but you know, but of most concern from our perspective is what people were doing about that. We asked the question whether they felt the condition of the community's economy had declined, and 29% believed it had. You know, it was worse than it was in the past. But then, you know, you say, okay, well, how are people feeling about that? And there was a significant percentage, it was like 16%, said that they had considered moving to a larger community, a larger area, a metropolitan area, most specifically for job opportunities.
16%?
Yes, yes. And, you know, now you could say, well, you know, maybe that's because, you know, because we did see it in the younger ages, as, you know, maybe it's a rite of passage or whatever to move to a city for a period of time. But when we also segmented a group of people that were considered leaders in their communities, as far as, you know, whether it's government leaders or in their churches or whatever, do you hold a leadership position? They were even more inclined to say that they were looking to move elsewhere.
Really?
And, you know, as you've probably heard the term brain drain, you know, there is concern about that. That, you know, if you do get various segments of the community moving on other places, it's more difficult to find the solutions that you need to.
You know, if you look at some of the history in North Dakota, South Dakota, with the farming models changing, they've lost a lot of their brain power in some of their communities for that very same reason.
Right.
And, you know, that's pretty interesting. It's somewhat upsetting to think that some of the best and the brightest could be pulling out and going somewhere else just because they don't see a long-term, really good future if they've got the skills to be making more money than they are in the particular area they live.
Right. You know, so even though quality of life, you know, there are many things that we all know are offered in rural Minnesota, it's about jobs and economy and careers and things like that too. And if those are not cultivated, and as parents, if we're not encouraging kids to come back, you know, to explore those options.
When you did that study, did you find that to be pretty much the same theme across rural Minnesota, whether it was in the south or the north, the west?
Yes, we did. We saw those that were most inclined to move to a metro area were west central and southeast Minnesota, but it was statewide. So it was an issue, and there's been a number of books written on that topic. The University of Minnesota has been studying that at some length, and they're seeing some movement of people in their 30s and 40s moving back out, but it is something I think that is really concerning. And that kind of relates to the whole issue of jobs, which was another thing that we found to be very interesting. I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody to know that that is a major concern. But one of the questions that we asked was, you know, what are the most significant priorities in terms of issues that need to be addressed in rural Minnesota? And having an adequate number of living wage jobs was overwhelmingly, and you can see on that chart, 48% said high quality jobs were the main issues. But, you know, interestingly, it's twice as many people as a percentage as those that said educational opportunities. This is it's a 30% point increase from 2000.
Really?
Yeah. So that is a huge jump.
Wow. And
that's something that, you know, jobs were important back then as well, but this is something that is significant. When we asked the people that we interviewed, you know, directly, do you think there are enough jobs in your community? And there were a significant percentage, you know, it was something like 2/3 that said no, they did not feel there were an adequate number of living wage jobs. And further, about half of the people felt that their communities were not doing enough in terms of economic development. Whether that's fair or not, you know, is probably open for discussion, because I know a lot of communities in rural Minnesota are doing a great deal in that regard. But I think what that speaks to is frustration that people want to see this resolved, and they don't feel at this point that it necessarily is.
It'd be interesting to make the connection between the people who are protesting around the United States right now about jobs, not enough jobs, too much money going to the corporations, perceive that. It would be interesting to know what people think those jobs can be, because it's so difficult to attract jobs, and I know you didn't do this as part of your study necessarily, but to take a town like Crosby or Aiken or any place in Minnesota really, and try to tell a manufacturing firm or a software company, come here. That's a really challenging issue right now.
It is.
And I know when I was in the educational circles, we spent a lot of time knocking on doors of companies trying to get them to come here. And they also can barter, and they'll barter one community against the other. And I think people often, if there's an economic development person in the community, I think the frustration often gets directed towards that person. But this is just a really, really big issue, very challenging issue.
It is. But I think, there were threads that were throughout this study that I think were very positive, that speak to the spirit that is alive in rural Minnesota communities, this optimism, this desire to work together. Maybe it isn't always working as well as it should, but, just a lot of things that I think would be very positive from an economic development standpoint, too. But I think if there was anything that was a number one concern that ran through this study, it was the economy is hitting rural Minnesota very, very hard, and potentially can have some long-term impact, because if people are moving because of it, as we were talking about, that can have long-term effects.
I know you don't work with you don't work for Bland, and so I hope I'm not throwing a question at you don't know, but I do know they do a lot of training. They have programs to try to deal with these sort of issues. Do you know some of the programs that they do offer? Yeah,
they have a number of leadership development programs, and those are held in communities throughout the state, and they are very successful. They have trained many, many leaders, and in fact, a number of the people that we interviewed, not all of them, but some of them had gone through that training, and we were seeing that as something that is definitely making an impact in terms of helping guide the decisions in those communities.
So all is not lost.
Absolutely not.
And I think that is one of the themes that I found really fascinating here too, is as bleak as it looks in some places, the American spirit is alive and well.
Absolutely.
People are not throwing in the towel. But it is interesting too that some people don't want to leave. Now maybe I'm jumping ahead here and I don't want to do that, but people seem to be, a lot of people are attached to their community and are a little reluctant to pull up stakes and go. I was with a person this weekend who's selling his home, and he has a pretty big home. The value of the house is down $150,000 from 4 years ago. And he didn't pay a lot of money for the house, it just appreciated a lot, and it was a big place. And so he decided that he's just going to have to sell it and eat that. And I think that's one of the things, that even if you have a small home, you haven't paid a lot of money for it, that they're depreciating now almost as fast as they were appreciating. So people are reluctant to take that investment they've had all of their lives.
It's difficult.
And throw it away.
But maybe something that's coming out of this is some of the newer industries that are emerging, the locally grown economy and agricultural movements, farmers markets, that sort of thing, CSAs, that is growing significantly throughout the state. So there may be some new things that emerge out of this economic situation as well. So like I said, I don't think it's all lost by any means.
I think another factor here is, and it's just my own estimation or opinion, but for quite a while it paid to go to college, it paid to go to a technical school and get a train into a track, and a lot of those people right now are in the same position of people who haven't had the training. They can't find the jobs, and it's getting a little discerning, and I think maybe the enrollments at almost all of our colleges this fall are down 3 and 4%, and I think we're seeing that trend being reversed a little bit. There aren't as many jobs out there, and even if you have a skill, you developed a skill, and yet you really need skills to go anywhere. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You can't throw in the towel. You still have to have those skills for when the opportunity arises to be able to step into that.
Well, and that was one of the things that came out of the study as well, is that people have a concern that perhaps students are not getting prepared in their high school years adequately for college and for job skills situations as well. So even though education was showing up as a number 2 priority, it is related to the economy too. They would like to see some improvements in that area. Another thing that was very interesting was we asked a question about, do you feel that the concerns about people in rural Minnesota are taken as seriously as those in the metro area? In other words, are your concerns being represented well? And there were a significant percentage, something like 43%, said that they don't believe that that there's enough that their needs are being represented as well as they should be. And 94% said it's important to support rural candidates that are speaking for rural Minnesota. So in other words, they're not feeling as represented as they would like to be, and they are saying they'd like to take that to the polls. So there's a message in there for decision makers as well.
It's been an evolution with the changing boundaries of our districts.
Yes.
That there's been more and more growth through the metro area, and I know that's something that you hear a lot, is that they often speak of rural Minnesota as greater Minnesota.
Right.
That's the politically correct way, but you hear more and more of it outstate Minnesota as
Yes.
like we're in North Dakota or
Yeah.
or South Dakota. We're not part of the Minnesota
Right.
equation, and I think that really is getting to be more of an issue. Don't you believe
Yes.
that's probably more of an issue as you see the legislation occurring?
Yes.
That the rural areas are sort of taking the back seats at some of these.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really think that's a major factor.
Yep.
And if people are going to keep leaving, it's going to become more of a factor as
Well-
we redistrict and get those boundaries changed and the areas grow geographically, but not by the same amount of people.
And I know the foundation feels, and I would very strongly agree, that really what needs to be understood is that how rural Minnesota goes, so goes the whole state. Because what we supply in rural Minnesota to the metro areas is critical, whether it is manpower that migrates, or it is agricultural resource, or it is raw materials for manufacturing, or whatever. I mean, you look at the agricultural situation, some of the major food manufacturers in the country are located in Minnesota. They depend on what's happening in rural Minnesota. So when you look at things like brain drain, it is as much an issue in metro as it is in greater Minnesota, because they have to be concerned about that. If they don't get the raw materials, they don't have jobs as well.
I was just looking at the news this week, or maybe it was last week, I think it was Roseau, is looking for more workers. There's no housing. And so they have that dilemma. And I think the whole thing with foreclosures is creating another dilemma for a lot of our communities. There's not a place to rent. And that's going to be something I think we're going to do some studying on this show down the road, because
that would be really interesting.
That's a big problem even in the metro area.
Yep.
The renting space is just about gone, and now prices are going up significantly.
They can't afford to buy a home.
Right. And I know in the oil areas in North Dakota, they're begging people to come. You can probably still literally drive to North Dakota, the oil fields, and get a job.
Yep.
But you won't have a place to stay. And that's becoming a real issue there. So that's something I think probably we weren't envisioning a few years ago, that in a lot of our rural areas, housing is going to be a problem.
And I think housing is something, certainly, that is an issue that the foundation has done some study on, and probably in future years that'll be a bigger piece of this study as well. Another factor that was critical to the foundation, and we're finding some very interesting things in the research, was that of leadership. We talked about that a few minutes ago. One of the important things that the foundation sees is that there is a need to be sure that community leadership is diversified, in the sense that it represents all segments of the community. And so we asked people that lived in rural Minnesota, do you feel that people from different backgrounds, do they fill leadership roles within my community? 43% said no, which that's concerning. What we saw were, in particular, those who are younger, have lower incomes, especially there are some cultural and ethnic issues there in terms of being involved in leadership. There's a significant number of people that live in rural Minnesota who said that they've never been asked.
To be in a leadership role
yes,
of any sort.
yes, whether it is in their church, whether it's in youth sports or whatever.
City council or...
Right, they're not. It tends to be income related oftentimes, or more business owners, or more traditional kinds of roles like that. Right, and there's a lot that can be lost or missed by not having everybody in the community represented within leadership. And that's something the foundation advocates.
When you took a community, let's just say if you took a community like Motley,
right?
What did you kind of define as that community? Did you have what kind of boundaries were you using when you did that study?
We did it across the board. So anybody who lived in rural Minnesota that wasn't in a metro area.
So if their address was Motley, they were part of the Motley
right.
community, or
yes.
if they were part of Wadena, they were the Wadena community. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think that certainly speaks to the need to have some rate of representation across the board, and find ways for people to work more collaboratively together.
And so when you say that their leadership was not diversified, are you talking? I mean, are you talking other cultures and male,
yes.
female? I mean, the whole
yes.
gamut.
Yes.
And it's pretty traditional places. It's hard to break into that, isn't it?
Yes,
it really
and that is one of the things that the leadership program through the foundation is helping to address, is intentionally involving people from all segments of the community, and I think there's been a lot of progress made as far as that goes.
I remember doing some surveys in the Brainerd area when I was in the college a number of years ago, asking people, do you think that this community is very welcoming to diverse
yes.
groups of people? And the surveys by the residents was very positive.
Yes.
But the responses by the students living here was almost like we were talking to two different worlds.
Yes.
Did you find that to be true?
Yes, yes. When we asked the question about do you feel your community is welcoming, while there were many people in rural Minnesota that said yes, we feel that is the case, non-Caucasians were not necessarily agreeing with that. And that's particularly interesting because you have a landscape here that is becoming more and more ethnically and culturally diverse over recent years. It was 50-some%, that said that yes, the community has changed a great deal in terms of the demographics, and yet, it just is not necessarily as welcoming as it could be. So those are issues that I think are emerging that maybe were not here 10 years ago to the degree. They may have been here in certain ways, but I think they're emerging as a bigger issue at this point.
I know in talking with the folks at Blandon, they said there are some communities that are doing fantastic work, and Pelican Rapids
yes.
is one where
yes.
they identified, maybe you know something
yes.
about that. I don't know, but I know it's a very large Hispanic
yes.
population now.
Yes.
Apparently they're really interweaving that community
yes.
into their other community.
Yes, they've made a lot of progress over there in that regard. It's a very diverse community in part because of the industrial base that they have there, and people have come there because of that. So it's yes, large Hispanic, but many other cultures as well. So there have been some challenges, but they have dealt with them very successfully, from what I understand.
What is 41% those who are younger and lower to say they've never been approached to serve in a leadership role? That's really an amazing statistic to me, isn't it? That really is.
And it's something that is not, none of these things are necessarily easily overcome. It's not something where, you just get the phone book and start calling people. But, hopefully what this study will do is to bring some of the issues to the table so people can recognize them and maybe just ask a few questions. Do we have the people that we need in the room? Are there parts of our community that are not adequately represented? Very, very few times do you see in a civic capacity, or even in some service organizations, the younger people in the community. And then you go back to the issue of, they're moving away. Well, they're not involved. They're not engaged as part of the community either. So there are ways that we could improve on that.
As a researcher, I know you came into this with a blind eye to the outcomes, but what was probably the biggest surprise to you in this research?
Biggest surprise. I think that, well, first of all, I think there were challenges that emerged from it, and there was a lot of optimistic things. I think that the economy was certainly, I knew it would be a major issue, but the degree to which it is an issue was pretty staggering. And also the fact that people are starting to act on that by considering leaving. Doesn't look like a lot of them have yet, but they are talking about it if those issues aren't addressed. So that was a big one to me. And I guess the other one being the need for leadership to be more inclusive. That is something that is being recognized. May not be entirely resolved at this point, but it's something that is certainly an issue.
I know one of the other issues that emerged is that there are a lot of talented people who aren't going to move away.
Right.
They're going to stay in their
Absolutely.
rural communities. And we're going to actually do a show down the road about that.
Mm-hmm.
Some really talented people, and they turn down really good opportunities in big cities to stay in their community. And I think
It's
that's
exciting.
a pretty positive sign too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I know in the Brainerd area there are a number of physicians, young physicians who have moved back, and that is a definite reversal of a trend that has happened, across the state. And I think that's really exciting. It's young people who grew up in this community, went away to school, and now are coming back to practice what they know. And that's very. I think it's a very optimistic trend and an exciting thing for everybody that lives here as well as for them.
Well, we're out of time.
Okay.
It's a fascinating subject. It's a really well-written study. I commend you on the work that you've done, and I think it's just very helpful in helping people in rural Minnesota understand what maybe needs to be done to make their communities more vibrant. If you're interested in the details, you could go to ruralplus.org. That's just rural pulse, not plus, ruralpulse.org, or you can go to Blandon's website, which is blandonfoundation.org, and get more information about the work that they're doing. It's really good stuff. You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. And if this is your first night you've been with us, we are glad to have you with us. We'll be back again in 2 weeks, and this show will run again on Sunday night at 6:30 if you'd like to, if you haven't seen or would like to tell someone about it. So thank you for watching. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.